Unit 1.2 The Thief's Story by Ruskin Bond. Ruskin Bond, 1934, is an Indian author of British descent. He lives with his adopted family in Landore in Mussoorie, India. The Indian Council for Child Education has recognized his role in the growth of children's literature in India. He got the Sahitya Academy Award in 1992 for Our Trees Still Grow in Dehra for his published work in English. He was awarded the Padma Shri in 1999 and the Padma Bhushan in 2014. Introduction. This is a simple story with an important message. There is a small-time thief, Hari Singh, who befriends a struggling author, Anil, in order to rob him. Anil is a good human being who wants to teach Hari Singh to read and write. Gradually, Anil develops trust in Hari Singh. But one day, Hari Singh steals Anil's money and tries to go away forever. But some inner voice stops him from doing so. He returns to Anil because he wants to live a life of respect. Anil does not show that he knew about the incident and accepts Hari Singh with open arms. Thus, the story tells us how a well-intentioned man reforms, meaning changes, a teenager who had earlier gone onto a wrong path. Module 1. I was still a thief when I met Anil, and though only 15, I was an experienced and fairly successful hand. Anil was watching a wrestling match when I approached him. He was about 25, a tall, lean fellow, and he looked easygoing, kind, and simple enough for my purpose. I hadn't had much luck of late, and thought I might be able to get into the young man's confidence. "You look a bit of a wrestler yourself," I said. A little flattery, meaning false praise, helps in making friends. "So do you," he replied, which put me off, meaning disturbed, for a moment because at that time I was rather thin. "Well," I said modestly, "I do wrestle a bit." "What's your name?" "Hari Singh," I lied. I took a new name every month. That kept me ahead of the police and my former employers. After this introduction, Anil talked about the well-oiled wrestlers who were grunting, meaning groaning, making sounds of pain, lifting and throwing each other about. I didn't have much to say. Anil walked away. I followed casually. "Hello again," he said. I gave him my most appealing, meaning attractive, smile. "I want to work for you," I said, "but I can't pay you." I thought that over a minute. Perhaps I had misjudged my man. I asked, "Can you feed me?" "Can you cook?" "I can cook." I lied again. "If you can cook, then maybe I can feed you." Explanation. This passage tells us about how the narrator, calls himself Hari Singh, met Anil, a young man, and tried to gain his confidence so that he would employ him. He tried to praise him and also looked appealingly at him. Finally, Anil employed him as a cook. Module 2. He took me to his room over the Jumna sweet shop and told me I could sleep on the balcony. But the meal I cooked that night must have been terrible because Anil gave it to a stray dog and told me to be off, meaning go away. But I just hung around, smiling in my most appealing way, and he couldn't help laughing. Later, he patted me on the head and said, "Never mind, he'd teach me to cook." He also taught me to write my name and said he would soon teach me to write whole sentences and to add numbers. I was grateful. I knew that once I could write like an educated man, there would be no limit to what I could achieve. It was quite pleasant working for Anil. I made the tea in the morning and then would take my time buying the day's supplies, usually making a profit of about ₹1 a day. I think he knew I made a little money this way, but he did not seem to mind. Explanation. Hari Singh of course couldn't cook, and Anil told him to leave, but Hari Singh just hung around and Anil allowed him to stay on. Anil even promised to teach him to cook. He also taught him to write his name, whole sentences, and to add. Hari Singh even stole ₹1 a day while buying supplies, but Anil ignored it. Module 3. Anil made money by fits and starts, meaning, in short, irregular intervals. He would borrow 1 week, lend the next. He kept worrying about his next check, but as soon as it arrived, he would go out and celebrate. It seems he wrote for magazines. A queer, meaning strange, way to make a living. One evening he came home with a small bundle of notes, saying he had just sold a book to a publisher. At night, I saw him tuck the money, meaning keep the money, under the mattress. Explanation. The narrator was quite surprised at the fact that Anil did not have a steady job, which gave him regular income. Sometimes he would get money for his work, and sometimes he would have to borrow. There were times he would worry about earning for his survival, but as soon as he would get some money, he would spend it carelessly. The narrator learned that he was a writer and found it a strange way of earning money. One day, the narrator saw that Anil had got some money after selling a book and kept it under the mattress. Module 4. I had been working for Anil for almost a month and, apart from cheating on the shopping, had not done anything in my line of work, meaning referring to his occupation of being a thief. I had every opportunity for doing so. Anil had given me a key to the door, and I could come and go as I pleased. He was the most trusting person I had ever met. And that is why it was so difficult to rob him. It's easy to rob a greedy man because he can afford to be robbed. But it's difficult to rob a careless man. Sometimes he doesn't even notice he's been robbed, and that takes all the pleasure out of the work. Well, it's time I did some real work, I told myself. I'm out of practice, and if I don't take the money, he'll only waste it on his friends. After all, he doesn't even pay me. Explanation. Hari Singh was a thief, and he had joined Anil as a cook so that after a few days he could rob his house. But it was almost a month and Hari Singh had not stolen anything except for ₹1 from the daily shopping. Hari Singh found it difficult to rob Anil because Anil never really cared about his possessions. After seeing the notes, Hari Singh felt it was a long time since he had not done his job, stealing. So he decided to steal the money. Module 5. Anil was asleep. A beam of moonlight stepped over the balcony and fell on the bed. I sat up on the floor, considering the situation. If I took the money, I could catch the 10:30 express to Lucknow. Slipping out of the blanket, I crept up to the bed. Anil was sleeping peacefully. His face was clear and unlined, meaning calm, showing no signs of worry. Even I had more marks on my face, though mine were mostly scars, meaning marks of wounds. My hand slid under the mattress, searching for the notes. When I found them, I drew them out without a sound. Anil sighed in his sleep and turned on his side towards me. I was startled and quickly crawled out of the room. When I was on the road, I began to run. I had the notes at my waist, held there by a string of my pajamas. I slowed down for a walk and counted the notes. 600 rupees in 50s. I could live like an oil-rich Arab for a week or two. Explanation. Hari Singh planned out the whole thing. He would steal the money and catch the next train to Lucknow. Anil was sleeping peacefully. Hari Singh quietly put his hand below the mattress and stole the money. He went out and started running with the money at his waist. He saw that it was 600 rupees and realized he could live lavishly. 2 weeks. Module 6. When I reached the station, I did not stop at the ticket office. I had never bought a ticket in my life, but dashed straight, meaning ran, to the platform. The Lucknow Express was just moving out. The train had still to pick up speed, and I should have been able to jump into one of the carriages. But I hesitated, meaning waited. For some reason I can't explain, and I lost the chance to get away. When the train had gone, I found myself standing alone on the deserted, meaning empty, platform. I had no idea where to spend the night. I had no friends, believing that friends were more trouble than help. And I did not want to make anyone curious, meaning suspicious, by standing at one of the small hotels near the station. The only person I knew really well was the man I had robbed. Leaving the station, I walked slowly through the bazaar. Explanation. When Hari Singh reached the station, the Lucknow Express, which he had planned to take, had just started moving out. Though Hari Singh could have easily boarded it, he just couldn't get himself to do so. He sat at the platform and wondered where to go. He did not have any friends as he thought they were a nuisance. Finally, he decided to return to Anil's house and started walking slowly through the bazaar. Module 7. In my short career, meaning job, occupation, as a thief, I had made a study of men's faces when they had lost their goods. The greedy man showed fear, the rich man showed anger, the poor man showed acceptance. But I knew that Anil's face, when he discovered the theft, would show only a touch of sadness, not for the loss of money, but for the loss of trust. I found myself in the Maidan, Indian word meaning ground, and sat down on a bench. The night was chilly, meaning cold. It was early November, and a light drizzle, meaning rain, added to my discomfort, meaning uneasiness. Soon it was raining quite heavily. My shirt and pyjamas, Indian word meaning loose trousers, stuck to my skin, and a cold wind blew the rain across my face. I went back to the bazaar and sat down in the shelter of the clock tower. The clock showed midnight. I felt for the notes. They were damp, meaning wet, from the rain. Anil's money. In the morning, he would probably have given me 2 or 3 rupees to go to the cinema, but now I had it all. I couldn't cook his meals, run to the bazaar, or learn to write whole sentences anymore. Explanation. As Hari Singh was walking away from the station, he started thinking about the situation. He had studied men's expressions on losing their goods. Somehow he knew that Anil's face would show a little sadness, not because of the money he lost, because the trust he had in Hari had been broken. Hari sat on a bench in a ground and kept thinking. This was the first time he felt uneasy on stealing something. He started thinking of the options. If he returned the money, Anil may give him some of it to go to the cinema, but if he didn't, he would have all the money and did not have to work as a cook or learn to write. Module 8. I had forgotten about them in the excitement of the theft. whole sentences, I knew could one day bring me more than a few hundred rupees. It was a simple matter to steal, and sometimes just as simple to be caught. But to be a really big man, a clever and respected man, was something else. I should go back to Anil, I told myself, if only to learn to read and write. I hurried back to the room feeling very nervous, for it is much easier to steal something than to return it undetected, meaning unnoticed. I opened the door quietly, then stood in the doorway in clouded moonlight. Anil was still asleep. I crept to the head of the bed, and my hand came up with the notes. I felt his breath on my hand. I remained still for a minute. Then my hand found the edge of the mattress and slipped under it with the notes. I awoke late next morning to find that Anil had already made the tea. He stretched out his hand towards me. There was a 50-rupee note between his fingers. My heart sank, meaning felt depressed. I thought I had been discovered. I made some money yesterday, he explained. Now you will be paid regularly. My spirits rose, meaning I became very hopeful. But when I took the note, I saw it was still wet from the night's rain. Today, we'll start writing sentences, he said. He knew, but neither his lips nor his eyes showed anything. I smiled at Anil in my most appealing way, and the smile came by itself without any effort. Explanation. Hari Singh now remembered how Anil had taught him to write sentences. He now realized that if he learned to read and write, he would lead a respectful life. He finally decided to go back to Anil only to learn to read and write. When he went back, Anil was still asleep. Hari Singh quietly slipped the money under the mattress. The next morning, Anil gave a 50-rupee note to Hari Singh and told him that he had got money and would now pay Hari Singh regularly. Hari Singh saw that the note was wet, and he knew that Anil must have understood what had happened at night. But Anil, a true gentleman, did not say anything. On the contrary, he told Hari Singh that they would start writing sentences. Anil realized that Hari Singh had transformed and thus did not mention anything and accepted and decided to help him learn and become a respectable citizen.